My name is Evelyn Marsh, and I spent 34 years teaching grade 4 at Maple Creek Elementary in Burlington, Ontario. I want you to understand something about the kind of person I was before all of this happened, because I think it matters. I was the teacher who stayed late, the one who bought school supplies out of her own pocket in September when the kids came in without pencils. I drove 40 minutes each way, packed a lunch every single day, wore the same winter coat for 11 years, not because I had to, because saving felt like safety, and safety felt like the only thing I could give my daughter after her father left. She was 7 when Glenn walked out. Just 7. She had the stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere, a gray floppy thing with one eye missing that she'd named Gerald. And I remember thinking the night he left, standing in her doorway watching her sleep, I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never feels this kind of loss again. I don't know if that was wisdom or the beginning of everything that went wrong. Her name is Cora. She's 36 now. I haven't spoken to her in 8 months. I need to start from the beginning, though, because if I just tell you the ending, you'll think I'm exaggerating. You'll think no daughter could do what she did. And I understand that instinct, because if someone had told me this story 10 years ago, I would have thought the same thing. I raised Cora in a semi-detached on Guelph line. Modest house, good neighborhood, the kind of street where people still shoveled each other's driveways. We didn't have extra money, but we didn't go without either. I was careful. I had a TFSA that I'd been adding to since 1991. I had a small pension through the school board. I had the house, which by the time Cora finished university had appreciated enough that I sometimes thought about what it meant, that number sitting there quietly. Cora was bright, genuinely bright, the kind of student who didn't need to study but did anyway because she liked knowing things. She got into Western for business, came out with honors, moved to Toronto at 22 and got a job at a mid-size marketing firm in Liberty Village. I was proud. I was so proud I kept the graduation photo on my fridge for 6 years. She met her husband. I'll call him my son-in-law because I can barely say his name without my jaw tightening. At 28. His name is Beau. Short for Beaumont, apparently, which tells you something about his family's sense of themselves. He's handsome in an obvious way, the kind of handsome that knows it. He grew up in West Vancouver, came to Toronto for his MBA, and spent most of his 20s in finance before starting something he called a consulting practice, which from what I could tell meant he worked from coffee shops and invoiced people sporadically. I didn't dislike him at first. I want to be honest about that. He was charming the way a salesman is charming, all eye contact, and remembering small details, the kind of man who makes you feel seen until you realize he does it with everyone. But Cora loved him. She lit up around him. And I'd spent enough years watching her be careful with people that I told myself, let her have this. They got engaged in the fall of 2019. Dinner at Canoe, the whole thing. She called me on the drive home, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. The wedding was the following September. Small because of everything that was happening in the world that year. 40 guests at a venue in Prince Edward County. I paid for it. Not because they asked me outright, but because when I offered, neither of them pushed back. The venue deposit alone was $11,000, with the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the dress, and I bought Cora's dress, which was $3,800 from a bridal boutique on Queen Street West. The total came to just over $31,000. I wrote that check without hesitation. She was my daughter. She'd never had a father who showed up. I wanted her day to be the one thing she hadn't had to scrimp for. What I didn't know then was that I was establishing a pattern. 6 months after the wedding, my son-in-law called me. Not Cora, him. He said they were looking at a condo in Leslieville, a 2-bedroom, nice building, good investment. The market was moving, he said, and they needed to act quickly. They had most of the down payment, but were short $19,000. He asked if I could lend it to them. I said I needed to think about it. He called back the next day. I transferred the money that Friday. I told myself it was a loan. I genuinely told myself that. I even mentioned it to Cora, said something about maybe drawing up a simple repayment schedule when they were settled. She laughed, not meanly, just lightly, the way you laugh at something that seems overly formal. "Mom," she said, "you know we're good for it." I never saw a dollar of that money again. Over the next 2 years, there were other calls. Smaller ones sometimes, larger ones, others. My son-in-law's consulting work had a slow quarter. They had unexpected condo fees, a special assessment from the building, a car that needed replacing. Cora changed jobs and there was a gap. He was putting together a new client proposal and needed to cover expenses up front. Each time I thought, this is the last time. Each time I said yes. A friend of mine, a woman I'd taught beside for 20 years, sharp and unsentimental, sat across from me at Tim Hortons one February afternoon and said, "Evie, you know what they're doing, don't you?" I said it was family. She said family doesn't borrow money they have no intention of returning. I went home a little irritated with her and sent my son-in-law $2,000 that same week for something I can't even remember now. The total, by the spring of last year, was $223,000. I counted it up one Saturday morning at my kitchen table with a notepad and my reading glasses and a cup of tea that went cold. I sat there for a long time afterward, not because I hadn't known, somewhere in myself, that it was a large number, but seeing it written down in my own handwriting, $223,000, and then looking around my kitchen, the same kitchen I'd painted myself in 2009, the same table I'd had since Cora was 12, I felt something shift in my chest, like a floorboard giving slightly under your weight. I was 63 years old. I had retired the previous June. My pension was decent but not lavish, just under $40,000 a year after tax. The TFSA was significantly lower than it should have been, and I had been having a pain in my left side for about 3 weeks that I'd been putting off looking into. I made the doctor's appointment the following Monday. It took 2 more appointments and an ultrasound and a biopsy before the word they used was confirmed. Early stage, the oncologist said. Very treatable. But I would need surgery and then 6 weeks of radiation, and there would be costs the provincial plan didn't cover. A private room if I wanted it. Certain medications, the practical costs of getting back and forth to Hamilton for treatment. Parking alone at the cancer center was $17 a day. I called Cora that evening. I don't know what I expected. I think some part of me expected the old Cora, the one who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and who called me from university just to talk. I told her what the doctor had said. I told her it was early and they'd caught it, and I wasn't frightened exactly, but I was worried about managing everything on my own. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Oh, wow, Mom, that's a lot." And then my son-in-law said something in the background, and she said, "Bo says to let us know if you need anything." I said I might need some help with costs for treatment. She said, "Yeah, we're kind of stretched right now. You know how it is." I said, "Yes." I said, "Of course." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I'm going to tell you now about the dinner, because this is the part that changed everything. Not just what happened. What I understood, finally, because of it. Cora and my son-in-law had a housewarming. They moved from the Leslieville condo to a house in East York. A semi-detached, and yes, I'd been part of how that happened too. A gift they'd called it that time. A real gift. I was very clear. $40,000 from the sale of some bonds I'd held for 15 years. They'd moved in October. The housewarming was a Saturday in November. I baked. I made the lemon squares Cora had liked since she was 10, and a loaf of cranberry walnut bread that her grandmother used to make at Christmas. I drove 40 minutes in light snow with those things in a bag on the passenger seat, and I felt, foolishly, I can see that now, genuinely happy. I was going to see the house. I was going to see my daughter. There were cars I didn't recognize parked along their street. I could see lights on, movement through the front window, hear music from the porch. I rang the bell. My son-in-law answered. He looked at me, and I want to be precise here, because the expression on his face was not surprise, it was not confusion, it was something that had clearly been decided in advance, and he said, "Evelyn, tonight is actually just close family." "I don't think Cora realized you were coming," I said. "She invited me." He said, "I know, but it's just been changed to kind of a family thing, you know. We should have called." He said it the way you'd tell a neighbor they'd come to the wrong door. Pleasant, but final. I stood there on my daughter's porch in the snow with her favorite lemon squares in my hands. I said, "Can I speak to Cora?" He paused. Then he turned slightly and called her name. She appeared at the end of the hallway. I could see her in the light. She was wearing a blue dress I didn't recognize. Her hair was done. She looked beautiful. And she looked at me for a moment, and then she looked at him and she said very quietly, "Mom, it's not really a good time." She didn't come to the door. She stood at the end of her hallway, the hallway of the house I had helped her buy, and she told me it wasn't a good time. I said, "Okay." I walked back to my car. I put the bag on the seat. I drove to the end of the street, pulled over, and sat there for about 10 minutes. I wasn't crying, which surprised me. I felt very clear, actually. Very calm in the way you sometimes feel when something inside you has finally finished breaking. I drove home. That night I made a list. Not of grievances. I've never been someone who does that, who keeps score on paper. It always seemed beneath both parties. This was a different kind of list. It was practical. It was what I had, what I'd given, what remained, and what I was going to do now. I called my bank the following Monday and spoke to my financial advisor, a woman I'd worked with for 9 years. I told her I needed to restructure some things. We spent an hour on the phone. I updated my will. I removed my son-in-law from the secondary beneficiary designation on my life insurance policy and replaced it with a hospice charity in Hamilton that a colleague had supported for years. I contacted a financial planner about converting part of my remaining RRSP into an annuity, so the income was protected and structured. I stopped the standing e-transfer I'd been making, quietly, without announcement, without drama. I did not call Cora. I did not send a message. I let the silence be what it was. 3 weeks went by, then 4. On a Thursday evening in early December, while I was watching something on television, my phone rang. It was her. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice was different, tighter, with an edge underneath it that I recognized as the particular tone people use when they're trying to sound casual about something that is not casual. She said she was just checking in. She said she hoped I was feeling okay. She said Bo had mentioned the e-transfers had stopped and she just wanted to make sure everything was all right with my account. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Mom, I should have come to the door." She wanted to know about the transfers. I didn't call back that night. I called back 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, with my tea and my notes, and the particular steadiness I'd been practicing. I said I was fine. I said my account was fine. I said I had made some decisions about how I was using my retirement savings going forward and had chosen to redirect some funds. I said it just like that. Redirect some funds, the way someone might discuss a financial instrument, not a wound. She said, "What does that mean?" I said it meant that I was making different choices now and that I needed to focus on my own stability, especially with the treatment coming up. There was a pause. Then she said, "You're punishing us." I said, "I'm not. I'm adjusting," she said, "after everything we've done," and then she stopped. I waited. She didn't finish the sentence. I don't think she could have said out loud what they had done. because saying it out loud would have required her to name it, and naming it would have made it real in a way she wasn't ready for. I said, "I love you, Cora. That hasn't changed." And I meant it. I still mean it. That's the strangest part. I still mean it completely. She hung up. My son-in-law called 2 hours later. His voice was different from Cora's. Where she'd gone quiet, he went careful. He said he understood I'd been upset about the dinner, that it had been a miscommunication, that he hoped I knew there was no intention to exclude me. He said it the way someone says a line they've prepared. He said they were in a difficult position right now, and that any changes I was making would have a real impact. I said I understood. He said, "So you'll reconsider?" I said, "No." He said, "Evelyn." I said, "I think we should give each other some space to think. Take care of yourselves." And I ended the call. I sat in my kitchen in the gray December light, and I thought about my grade 4s. All those children I'd spent decades watching. The ones who were kind, the ones who were careless, the ones who needed things named clearly before they understood them. I had been a patient teacher. Patient the way you are when you believe people will grow into better versions of themselves, given enough time and enough gentleness. I wondered if I'd made the same mistake with my daughter. The treatment started in January. Radiation, 6 weeks, every weekday. My friend, the unsentimental one from the Tim Hortons conversation, drove me twice a week without being asked. My neighbor, a retired nurse named Phyllis, brought soup on Tuesdays. The nurses at the cancer center in Hamilton knew my name by the second week. Cora did not call to ask how it was going. I finished treatment on a Friday in late February. The oncologist said everything looked good. I drove myself home, stopped at the Sobeys on the way, bought a small bunch of tulips because it was that kind of day. I put them in the blue vase on the windowsill and stood there looking at them for a while. I felt something I don't have a perfect word for. Lighter, maybe, but not in the way of being unburdened. More like having finally set something down that I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. I hadn't realized how exhausted I was until I wasn't carrying it anymore. It's been 8 months since the dinner. I'm well. I walk every morning down to the lake trail and back, about 45 minutes. I've been substitute teaching 2 days a week, just grade school, nothing heavy. I miss the kids more than I expected to. I went to Halifax in the spring with my friend and we ate lobster on the waterfront, and she made me laugh until I had to put my wine down. Last month, a letter arrived. Not from Cora. From her, through a mutual family contact, a cousin of mine who I think agreed to pass it along because she felt sorry for someone. The letter said that Cora missed me, that she was sorry about the dinner, that things had been complicated and she hadn't handled it well. There was a sentence in there that said she hoped I could understand the pressures they'd been under. I read it twice. Then I put it on the kitchen table and looked out the window at the street. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with it. Some days I think about calling her. I think about the stuffed rabbit, Gerald, and the way she used to reach for my hand crossing parking lots, even when she was old enough to cross on her own. I think about the woman in the blue dress at the end of the hallway who couldn't make herself walk to the door. I know that version of my daughter is still in there somewhere. I'm just no longer willing to bankrupt myself, financially, emotionally, physically, waiting for her to find her way back to it. I spent 34 years teaching children that their choices have consequences, that kindness matters, that taking things for granted costs something, that the people who love you most deserve the most care, not the least. I thought I taught my daughter the same things. Maybe I just never made her practice. I keep thinking about the lemon square sitting on my passenger seat on the drive home that night, still warm, wrapped in the same wax paper I'd been using for 30 years. There's something I've had a long time to sit with now, and it's this. What happened to me didn't come out of nowhere. It grew slowly, the way most things do when you aren't paying attention. Every time I said yes when I should have said, "Let me think about that." Every time I transferred money to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. Every time I told myself that generosity was the same thing as love, I was teaching my daughter something without realizing I was teaching her anything at all. I was showing her that my presence in her life had a price tag and that I would always keep paying it. That's not a criticism of her. It's a reckoning with myself. I spent my career watching children learn how to treat people. You can tell within a few weeks of a school year which kids have been taught that their feelings are the only ones that count. They're not bad children. They've just never been given the chance to practice anything different. Nobody made them sit with discomfort long enough to grow from it. I saw that in my classroom for 34 years, and somehow I didn't see it happening in my own kitchen. Integrity. The real kind, not the version you perform for other people. It has to be practiced. It doesn't arrive fully formed. Cora was never asked to practice it with me because I was always there, always accommodating, always absorbing whatever the cost was. So she wouldn't have to feel it. That wasn't love. That was me being afraid of her disappointment. There's a difference, and I wish I'd understood it sooner. The clear thinking I should have applied earlier, the kind that asks hard questions, that looks at a pattern of behavior and names it honestly. I saved that for my classroom. I was so careful with other people's children, so measured and thoughtful. And then I came home and checked my bank account and transferred money to my son-in-law without asking a single question. Intelligence without courage is just knowing what you should do and doing something else anyway. And then there's the matter of getting back up. I finished radiation on a Friday in February and drove myself home and bought tulips. Nobody handed me that steadiness. I'd had to find it. The way you find things you didn't know you'd lost, slowly and mostly in quiet. The women who showed up, my friend who drove me to Hamilton, Phyllis with her soup on Tuesdays, they reminded me that the life I had was still worth showing up for. You don't find that kind of resilience by having everything go right. You find it by having things go very wrong and discovering that you're still standing at the end of it. I don't know what Cora and I will be to each other going forward. I genuinely don't. But I know what I am now. Careful with myself in a way I never was before. Honest about what I will and won't accept. And no longer willing to confuse sacrifice with love. That's not nothing. At 63, after everything, that's not nothing at all.